When Olivia married Matthew, she envisioned a life built on mutual respect and shared dreams. They had met in college, where Olivia majored in creative writing and Matthew studied business. His charm was infectious, and his ambitious nature drew Olivia to him like a moth to a flame. Together, they dreamed of success. Matthew would start his own business, and Olivia would write her first novel. She believed in him so deeply that when he proposed, she set her dreams aside, confident that their journey together would be worth any sacrifice. In the beginning, they were a formidable team. Olivia managed the household and supported Matthew as he worked long hours, pouring himself into his budding tech startup. Their small apartment became a haven of love, late-night brainstorming sessions, and promises of a brighter future. Olivia often joked that she was Matthew's silent partner, working tirelessly behind the scenes to keep their life running smoothly. But as the years went by, the partnership began to feel one-sided. Matthew's startup took off, and with success came change. He became consumed by his work, leaving Olivia to shoulder the burdens of their home life. She cooked, cleaned, managed their finances, and even helped Matthew prepare presentations. Yet, her efforts were met with indifference, her sacrifices invisible to the man she had once admired. Over time, the cracks in their marriage grew deeper, but Olivia remained steadfast, convinced that things would get better if she just worked harder. By their 10th anniversary, Matthew had transformed into a different man. He had traded humility for arrogance, kindness for condescension. Olivia felt like a ghost in her own home, her dreams buried under the weight of his ambitions. When she broached the topic of her writing, he dismissed it as a childish hobby, telling her to focus on real priorities. For the first time, Olivia began to question whether her sacrifices had been worth it. Then, one evening, as they sat in their lavish home, Matthew delivered the final blow. He suggested a divorce, claiming they had grown apart. In truth, Olivia knew he had already checked out of their marriage, his attention now fixated on his success and the shiny life it brought. Heartbroken but unwilling to let him define her, Olivia agreed. She would not let him erase her contributions or dignity, even if it meant fighting for what she deserved. The days leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and emotional exhaustion. Olivia revisited memories of the life she had built with Matthew, each recollection tinged with bittersweet regret. She found herself replaying the arguments, the moments he undermined her, and the countless times she bit her tongue to keep the peace. She felt like a stranger to the confident, hopeful woman she once was. Meanwhile, Matthew relished his newfound freedom. He had moved into a sleek penthouse and flaunted his success at every opportunity. To him, the divorce was just another transaction, a way to clear his slate and move on to a life unencumbered by what he now saw as Olivia's mediocrity. His lawyer assured him that the case would be straightforward, given his financial dominance and Olivia's lack of formal employment. But what Matthew underestimated was Olivia's resolve. She had spent her marriage sacrificing, compromising, and enduring. Now, she was determined to reclaim her voice, even if it meant standing alone against the man she once loved. Olivia spent sleepless nights gathering evidence of her contributions. She documented everything: the years she spent as an unpaid assistant to Matthew's business, the nights she stayed up helping him perfect pitches, and even the financial sacrifices she made to keep them afloat during the early days of his company. It was a painful exercise, but one she approached with the meticulous care of someone who had nothing left to lose. Her lawyer, Rachel, was both impressed and moved by Olivia's diligence. "You've done more for this marriage than most people would," Rachel said during one of their late-night meetings. "It's time the court sees that." Olivia nodded, her eyes weary but determined. She wasn't after revenge, she wanted recognition, for herself and for anyone who had ever been dismissed as insignificant. As the trial date approached, Olivia prepared herself for the humiliation she knew Matthew would inflict. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that he planned to discredit her entirely, painting her as a leech who had contributed nothing to his success. Though the thought of facing him in court made her stomach churn, she refused to let his narrative define her. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Matthew arrived in a tailored suit, exuding confidence. Olivia, dressed simply but elegantly, entered quietly, her head held high. As the proceedings began, Matthew's lawyer wasted no time in launching an attack. He described Olivia as a housewife with no ambitions who had lived off her husband's hard work for over a decade. The words stung, but Olivia remained composed, her hands gripping the edges of the table. When it was her turn to testify, Olivia stood calmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She outlined her contributions with clarity, detailing her role in Matthew's early success. "I may not have held a formal title," she said, looking directly at the judge, "but I was the foundation on which his success was built." Her words silenced the room, and for the first time, Matthew seemed unsettled. Her lawyer then presented a folder containing evidence of her work: emails, financial records, and testimonials from people who had witnessed her sacrifices. The judge reviewed the documents with a furrowed brow, occasionally glancing at Matthew, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As the second day of the trial began, Olivia braced herself for Matthew's next move. His lawyer introduced witnesses who painted a flattering picture of Matthew as a self-made man. One former employee described him as a visionary leader, conveniently omitting the behind-the-scenes chaos Olivia had helped manage in those early, unstable years. Matthew himself sat smugly, nodding along as the testimonies inflated his ego. When it was Olivia's turn, Rachel called a surprise witness, Matthew's first assistant. The woman, now a respected executive, testified about how Olivia had often filled in crucial gaps. When Matthew was too overwhelmed or distracted, Olivia was the one who stepped in, she said. She was practically an unpaid project manager, but no one ever gave her credit. Her words sent a ripple through the courtroom, and Matthew's confident facade faltered ever so slightly. The judge seemed intrigued by the mounting evidence of Olivia's behind-the-scenes contributions. His sharp gaze lingered on Matthew, as if silently questioning how a man who owed so much to his wife could so easily dismiss her. The third day brought an unexpected twist. During cross-examination, Matthew's lawyer presented private text messages between Olivia and a friend, where she vented about feeling unappreciated. "Doesn't this prove that you were unhappy and uninvested in the marriage?" the lawyer asked, his tone condescending. Olivia took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, I was unhappy," she admitted, her voice unwavering. "But that unhappiness came from giving everything I had and receiving nothing in return. If anything, these messages show how deeply I cared, how much I wanted this marriage to work, even when it felt impossible." Her honesty resonated with the spectators, and Matthew's lawyer, visibly taken aback, quickly changed the subject. But Matthew couldn't resist a jab. As they left the courtroom, he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "She's just bitter because she couldn't make anything of herself." Olivia didn't flinch, but Rachel leaned over and whispered, "He just gave us all the ammunition we need." That evening, Olivia sat alone in her apartment, replaying Matthew's cruel words. For years, she had allowed his disdain to chip away at her confidence, but now, something shifted. She realized that his insults weren't a reflection of her worth, they were a projection of his own insecurities. The next morning, she walked into court with a quiet determination that caught everyone's attention. When it was her turn to speak, Olivia addressed the court directly, recounting the sacrifices she had made for her husband's success. She spoke of the nights she stayed up typing his proposals, the family events she missed to host his clients, and the dreams she had set aside to build a life that he ultimately discarded. Her voice trembled with emotion, but she never wavered. "I am not a failure," she concluded, her gaze piercing Matthew's. "I am a woman who gave everything I had to a man who didn't value it. But that ends today." Rachel had saved the most damning evidence for this moment. She presented a timeline of Matthew's early business ventures, meticulously annotated with Olivia's contributions. The timeline included receipts for household expenses Olivia had covered with her savings and emails where Matthew sought her advice on critical decisions. Then came the financial documents. Rachel revealed that Olivia had liquidated her modest inheritance to keep Matthew's company afloat during its first year. "This was the safety net her parents left her," Rachel said, letting the gravity of the sacrifice hang in the air. "And she gave it up for a man who now calls her useless." The judge studied the documents intently before turning to Matthew. "Do you dispute these claims?" he asked, his tone severe. Matthew hesitated, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. "No," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. The courtroom fell silent as the judge leaned forward, his expression stern. "Mr. Carter," he began, addressing Matthew directly, "it is clear to me that your wife's contributions were not only significant but foundational to your success. Your dismissive attitude toward her sacrifices is both disheartening and unbecoming of a man in your position." Matthew shifted uncomfortably, his confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of the judge's words. Olivia sat still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, fighting the urge to smile. For the first time, someone in a position of authority was holding Matthew accountable. The judge turned to Olivia, his tone softening. "Mrs. Carter, your resilience is commendable. It is my duty to ensure that your sacrifices are recognized and valued, both in this courtroom and beyond." As the trial progressed, another unexpected witness took the stand, an old family friend who had known Olivia and Matthew during their early years of marriage. He recounted how Olivia had single-handedly organized charity events for Matthew's business, often working behind the scenes to ensure their success. "She was the glue that held everything together," he said, his voice firm. "Without her, I doubt Matthew would have made it past his first year in business." His testimony was a turning point, shifting the narrative from Matthew's self-made success to the truth. He had stood on Olivia's shoulders to reach his heights. The testimony struck a chord with the courtroom. Even the spectators, who had initially been skeptical of Olivia's claims, began to murmur in agreement. Matthew, however, seemed unmoved. He rolled his eyes and whispered something to his lawyer, but his confidence was visibly waning. Olivia, emboldened by the support she was receiving, took the stand again. This time, she shared her most painful memories, moments when she had begged Matthew to acknowledge her efforts, only to be met with ridicule. Her voice broke as she described how his dismissiveness eroded her sense of self-worth. "I loved him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But love shouldn't cost you your identity." The judge allowed her to compose herself before calling a recess. As the courtroom emptied, Matthew sat alone, his smug demeanor replaced by unease. When the trial resumed, Matthew's lawyer launched a last-ditch effort to discredit Olivia. He argued that her sacrifices were voluntary and therefore irrelevant to the case. "She chose to support him," the lawyer declared, "and now she wants to be rewarded for it." Rachel quickly countered, emphasizing that Olivia's contributions were not just acts of love but essential to Matthew's success. "This isn't about rewards," Rachel argued. It's about fairness and recognition." Matthew, sensing the tide turning against him, interjected. "She's just trying to bleed me dry," he snapped, his frustration boiling over. The outburst only served to alienate him further, and Olivia remained composed, knowing she didn't need to stoop to his level. The courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically when Rachel unveiled a bombshell. She presented evidence of offshore accounts Matthew had failed to disclose, suggesting he had been hiding assets to avoid a fair settlement. The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. The judge immediately called for an investigation, and Matthew's lawyer looked visibly panicked. Olivia's calm demeanor remained intact, but her heart raced with a mixture of vindication and disbelief. For the first time, Matthew's arrogance gave way to fear. He stammered as he tried to explain the accounts, but the judge silenced him with a sharp rebuke. "We will get to the bottom of this," the judge declared, setting the stage for a dramatic conclusion. Word of the trial spread quickly, and the courtroom became a spectacle. Journalists began attending the proceedings, eager to report on the scandal. Public opinion swayed heavily in Olivia's favor as details of her sacrifices and Matthew's deceit came to light. Spectators filled the benches, many openly showing their support for Olivia. Some even approached her during recesses to offer words of encouragement. Matthew, once so confident in his public image, found himself the target of scorn and ridicule. The growing support bolstered Olivia's resolve. She realized she was no longer fighting just for herself but for countless others whose sacrifices had been overlooked. On the final day of the trial, a new witness emerged, a former employee of Matthew's company. The man testified about how Olivia had often stepped in to resolve crises, acting as an unofficial advisor and mediator. "She was the backbone of the company," he said. "Without her, we would have crumbled in the early days." His testimony further dismantled Matthew's narrative of self-made success. The judge seemed deeply moved, nodding as he took notes. Matthew, meanwhile, slumped in his chair, his confidence completely eroded. As the trial drew to a close, the judge addressed the court with a solemn tone. "This case has revealed a troubling pattern of disregard for the contributions of a spouse," he said. "Marriage is a partnership, and no partner should be made to feel invisible." Turning to Matthew, the judge delivered a scathing critique of his actions. "Your arrogance and dishonesty have not only hurt your wife but also undermined the very foundation of your success. It is clear to me that justice requires significant redress." With the evidence presented and testimonies concluded, the courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver his verdict. Olivia sat with her hands clasped tightly, her heart pounding. Matthew avoided her gaze, his usual bravado replaced by a sullen silence. The judge ruled in Olivia's favor, awarding her a substantial share of the marital assets and alimony. Additionally, he ordered an investigation into Matthew's hidden accounts, ensuring that justice would extend beyond the trial. The ruling was met with a collective gasp from the spectators, followed by scattered applause. Olivia felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt seen and valued. Matthew, however, erupted in anger, accusing the court of bias. The judge calmly reminded him of the evidence against him, dismissing his protests. "This is not just about you," the judge said. "It's about accountability and fairness." As the courtroom emptied, Matthew stormed out, his face red with fury. Reporters swarmed him, but he pushed past them, refusing to answer their questions. Olivia watched him go, feeling a mixture of pity and triumph. She knew his reaction was born of his inability to face the truth. While she didn't wish him ill, she was relieved to finally be free of his shadow. Later that evening, Olivia sat by her window, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The trial had been grueling, but it had also been transformative. She realized that her sacrifices had not been in vain. They had made her stronger, more resilient, and more determined to reclaim her identity. As she gazed at the city lights, Olivia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace the future on her own terms. The days following the trial were both liberating and overwhelming for Olivia. On one hand, she no longer felt the oppressive weight of Matthew's disdain pressing on her shoulders. On the other, she found herself navigating an unfamiliar world where she was entirely responsible for shaping her future. It was daunting but also exhilarating, a chance to start anew, unencumbered by the limitations her marriage had imposed. Olivia poured her energy into creating a life that reflected her long-suppressed dreams. She moved into a modest yet charming apartment filled with natural light, where she spent her mornings journaling and her afternoons exploring the city. The act of choosing furniture and decorating the space became a symbol of her newfound independence, each choice reflecting her tastes and preferences rather than someone else's. Reclaiming her passion for writing became Olivia's top priority. She joined a local creative writing workshop, where she found a supportive community of aspiring authors. The first time she shared a short story during the workshop, she was nervous, fearing judgment. Instead, she was met with praise and encouragement. For the first time in years, she felt validated, not as someone's wife or caretaker, but as an individual with a voice worth hearing. Months passed, and Olivia began to see tangible results from her efforts. She submitted her first short story to a literary magazine, and to her astonishment, it was accepted. Holding the printed publication in her hands, she felt a surge of pride. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about proving to herself that she could achieve something entirely on her own. Her daily routine became a source of comfort and inspiration. She spent mornings writing and afternoons at the local library, where she read voraciously, absorbing lessons from her favorite authors. Evenings were reserved for quiet reflection or occasional outings with friends, many of whom she had reconnected with after years of estrangement. These friendships became a lifeline, providing the support and companionship she had long been denied. Despite her growing success, Olivia remained humble, grateful for every opportunity and challenge that came her way. She had learned that true happiness came not from external validation but from living authentically. Each day brought new possibilities, and she embraced them with open arms, determined to make the most of her second chance at life. One rainy evening, after a particularly productive writing session, Olivia found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She decided to write a letter, not to anyone else, but to her younger self, the woman who had once been so full of dreams but had gradually lost her way. It was both an exercise in gratitude and a declaration of her growth. "Dear Olivia," she began, her pen gliding across the page. "You have faced more than your fair share of challenges, but you have also discovered a strength you didn't know you had. You are not defined by anyone else's expectations or opinions. Your worth comes from within, and no one can take that away from you." The letter grew longer as Olivia poured her heart into it, recounting the lessons she had learned and the resilience she had developed. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. It wasn't meant for anyone else to read, it was a gift to herself, a reminder of the journey she had traveled and the woman she had become. While Olivia was rebuilding her life, Matthew's world was crumbling. The investigation into his hidden assets revealed not only financial misconduct but also a pattern of unethical behavior that tarnished his reputation. Clients began to pull out of deals, and his once thriving business faced mounting lawsuits. For someone who had built his identity around success, the fall from grace was devastating. The media, once enamored with Matthew's charisma, turned on him with ruthless efficiency. Articles detailing his deceit filled the headlines, and public opinion shifted dramatically. Former employees came forward with stories of exploitation and manipulation, painting a picture of a man who had used others for personal gain. Olivia learned about Matthew's struggles through mutual acquaintances, but she felt no sense of triumph. If anything, she pitied him. His downfall was a consequence of his own arrogance and dishonesty, and she hoped he might use the experience as an opportunity for self-reflection. For her part, Olivia chose to focus on her own journey, leaving Matthew to face the consequences of his actions alone. One afternoon, as Olivia was preparing for a writing workshop, she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to a former employee of Matthew's company, a woman who had testified on Olivia's behalf during the trial. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice warm and sincere. Olivia was taken aback. "Thank me? For what?" she asked. "You gave me the courage to leave a toxic work environment and start fresh," the woman explained. "Seeing you stand up for yourself inspired me to do the same. I've since started my own consulting business, and it's going better than I ever imagined. I just wanted you to know that your strength made a difference." The conversation left Olivia deeply moved. It was a reminder that her journey, painful as it had been, had a ripple effect on others. Knowing that her story had empowered someone else to make a positive change filled her with a profound sense of purpose. Several months later, Olivia received an email from Matthew. His tone was uncharacteristically humble, apologizing for the way he had treated her during their marriage. He admitted that he had taken her for granted and expressed regret for the pain he had caused. Though Olivia appreciated the apology, she didn't feel the need to respond. Her life had moved forward, and she saw no reason to revisit the past. Still, she hoped that Matthew's newfound humility might lead him to become a better person. As she closed the email, Olivia felt a sense of closure. Matthew's words, though long overdue, affirmed what she had always known: her sacrifices had been real, her worth undeniable. It was a chapter she was finally ready to close, leaving her free to focus on the life she was building for herself. The story of Olivia's trial continued to make waves long after the verdict was delivered. Journalists dissected every detail, focusing on the themes of sacrifice, respect, and the invisibility of unpaid labor in marriages. Olivia, once overlooked and underestimated, became an unexpected symbol of resilience. Requests for interviews flooded her inbox, but Olivia approached them cautiously. She had no desire to dwell on the painful details of her past or to sensationalize her story. Instead, she agreed to a select few appearances, focusing on platforms where she could highlight the broader lessons of her journey. One such event was a televised panel discussion about the undervaluation of domestic contributions in modern society. During the discussion, Olivia spoke with poise and conviction. "For years, I believed that my sacrifices were just part of being a good wife," she explained. "But marriage is a partnership, not a one-way street. My story isn't unique, there are countless people whose work behind the scenes goes unnoticed. It's time we start recognizing and valuing those contributions." Her words struck a chord, sparking conversations across the country. On the one-year anniversary of the trial, Olivia chose to mark the occasion in her own way. Rather than celebrating publicly or revisiting the courtroom drama, she spent the day reflecting on her journey and the growth she had achieved. She began the morning with a walk through the park, a place that had become her sanctuary during her most challenging days. As she strolled beneath the canopy of trees, she felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her newfound freedom, but for the strength she had discovered within herself. Each step felt like a reminder of how far she had come. That evening, she prepared a small but elegant dinner, indulging in her favorite dishes. She lit a single candle and toasted to herself, not out of vanity, but as an acknowledgement of her resilience. The quiet celebration was deeply personal, a moment to honor her journey without fanfare or pretense. As she sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle, Olivia felt at peace. She was finally living on her own terms. With time, Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to helping others navigate similar struggles. She began volunteering at a local women's center, offering workshops on financial independence, emotional resilience, and reclaiming self-worth after difficult relationships. Her workshops quickly became popular, drawing attendees from all walks of life. Olivia's approach was empathetic yet empowering. She shared her story openly, not to elicit pity but to show that transformation was possible. "You don't have to have all the answers right away," she would tell her audience. "Sometimes, the first step is simply believing that you deserve better." One of the most rewarding aspects of her work was seeing the impact it had on others. Women who had once felt trapped or voiceless began to find their footing, inspired by Olivia's example. Some started new careers, others found the courage to leave toxic relationships. Each success story reinforced Olivia's belief that her journey had a purpose far beyond her own healing. Years later, Olivia stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, delivering the keynote address at a prestigious women's empowerment conference. The audience, a mix of professionals, activists, and everyday women seeking inspiration, hung on her every word. "My story is not extraordinary," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's the story of countless people who give everything they have, only to be told it's not enough. But what I've learned is that our value isn't determined by someone else's perception. It's something we carry within us, something no one can take away." As she concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. Olivia stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The woman who had once felt invisible now commanded the attention of hundreds, her voice resonating far beyond the confines of the stage. That evening, as she walked through the quiet streets of the city, Olivia felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her life was not without its challenges, but she had found a balance that brought her peace. She was living authentically, guided by her values and dreams. And in doing so, she had not only reclaimed her identity but also created a legacy of empowerment and hope for others.